Welcome to Cape Ann Report. I'm your host, Maureen Aylward. Cape Ann Report is a weekly program that focuses on things that are happening around Cape Ann. And on this show, I'm speaking with Stephanie Benenson of Harbor Voices Project. Stephanie, welcome to Cape Ann Report.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks.
You are an artist, and you have put together this project called Harbor Voices. And would you please tell me about what Harbor Voices is all about?
Sure. Harbor Voices is a public art nonprofit that focuses on collecting stories and connecting people. There are three parts of the project. The first part is collecting ancestral stories of immigration and connecting them to recent stories of immigration to Cape Ann. The second part of the project involves nonprofits that represent recent immigrants in the community in need and offers community members an opportunity to fund a need on our website at harborvoices.com. The third part of the project is where these two sort of disparate sounding things come together, where we connect stories and needs in a public art light installation that's going to be at City Hall on the weekend of December 9th. The idea behind the light installation is that with every story that's shared, there is a thread of connection to another story, and that things that happened in the past oftentimes sound a lot like things that are happening currently. So, for example, I met with a high school teacher recently who told me that when he immigrated to this country from Italy in 1972, he was in school and he didn't speak a word of English, and he felt intimidated and isolated and wanted to drop out. But he met a teacher, and this teacher took him under his wing, and he learned the language, and now look at him, he speaks 3 languages, and he's a leader in the community and a mentor to a lot of his students. And he remembers to this day the first sentence that he spoke in English, which was, "This is a bird," and he told me this in a story that he shared with me recently. So I'll take a story like that, for example, and I'll connect it to a story of a recent immigrant in the community who is struggling with language in an English language learning class. And when this student sees their story lined up next to someone who has a success story of coming to this country, of mastering the language, of finding his own path, then they feel inspired and they feel part of a larger conversation with regard to local history and community. And that thread of connection becomes visualized in this light installation that I'm doing in the City Hall auditorium.
Well, that's really exciting, and it's also hope. It's so hopeful.
It's very hopeful.
It is, and it's inspiring and hopeful, and making these connections, and then having the public art piece is just this nice extra. So you're recording the stories, or how are you collecting them?
Sure. The stories, I'm recording some of the stories, and the stories are going to become a sound element in the art installation. I'm also hosting sort of storytelling, sharing sessions there are some classrooms where students just raise their hands and say, "Oh, well, I was told that my great-great-grandfather immigrated to Cape Ann from Sweden," or "my great-grandmother immigrated here from Sicily," and they share stories about their own ancestral history. And the idea of the project is not necessarily to collect and record a lot of stories. It's more just to get people to think about their personal histories and how it can relate to kind of current community life.
Yeah, personally, I draw so much from my own grandmother who immigrated from Ireland, and she came to Medford, and so for me, that's such a huge part of my life. Mm-hmm. And I've learned so much from the stories my aunts have told me, and my mother told me, and it's all brought down through family history and family conversations, and how important family storytelling is too.
Mm-hmm. And it is so important, I think, for people to connect to their own family histories. Mm-hmm. And I think that the second part of the project, where people can go to the website and fund a need for a recent family that's just arrived here.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Give me some examples of who the partners are on the website, and also how donors could go to the website and help.
Sure,
someone.
I would love to. So we're partnering right now with nonprofits on Cape Ann. The Wellspring House, Pathways for Children, the Open Door, the Grace Center, And we're also offering opportunities to fund some after-school or supplemental programming for English language learners in the public schools. And the idea behind this part of the project, which is really exciting for me, is that, for example, I met with someone recently that said, it was another language learning based story, said, my great-grandfather moved here and didn't speak the language, but his neighbor took him in and shared books with him and taught him the language, and he learned how to speak English in that way. And so then I'll talk to Pathways for Children, for example, that has a literacy task force. And you can make a donation on the website for $50, and that will fund books, supplies, teachers for one of these literacy task force classes. And so giving is also part of the project. I think that connecting to our personal histories, becoming more socially active, becoming creative, giving kids voice and letting them know that regardless of where you're from, you're an important part of our cultural community here on Cape Ann, I think is really important to the project. But we also want people that feel compelled to give because of this project to have a really easy way to do that with 1 or 2 clicks on our website.
Yeah, you're making that tangible connection. And also, isn't it part funding even materials for homes, or someone, an immigrant arrives and
yes, there's a home starter kit that the Grace Center has posted. We have a lot of different things that on the website that you can fund. And all of these organizations do play different roles. And actually, since starting the Public Art Project, a lot of organizations have reached out to us and said, hey, we have this nonprofit and we do this one thing for people, but we don't have the capability for someone to donate on our website, so can we put something on your website so that you can help us connect with people? And so I think that making the connections through storytelling, but also making this kind of connection between resources and needs, I think is also sort of a big part of this project.
And I love the visualization piece too, because we often think about those threads of connection. We often think about, oh, this is connected to this, and then when you start talking to people, especially about their family history, you're already making that connection. And to see it visually, can you describe a little bit about it's going to be in City Hall, and it's going to be in the
auditorium.
The auditorium there. And what is it going to look like? You're going to look up and see the different lights. Can you tell us about the public art installation
Sure.
piece?
So in my studio, I have what I've called a wall of connections. And every time I collect a story, I put one push pin on one side, depending on when the story was collected, if it's a century old or if it's a month old. And I'll connect it either to a nonprofit or I'll connect it to another story that I've heard. And so I have all of these strings going across this big white wall in my studio. And every string will become a beam of light in the installation. So when you walk into the room will be very dimly lit, and there will be beams of light that go across the room, and they all interconnect, and there will be places where the beams of light connect that represent sort of the connection between community members or connection between nonprofits and community members. And then in the background, there will also be sound of little snippets and phrases of stories that I've collected. And I'm collecting stories in a lot of different languages. I think you'd be really amazed to see the breadth of this sort of cultural mix that we have here. We have, we have people from Syria and Uganda and Cambodia and the Dominican Republic and Italy and Portugal, and my family history is also Irish, but I have there's just such a wonderful mix, so we want to represent that in some of the different languages, and so you'll walk in and it'll be dimly lit and there'll be all of these lights, and I think it'll be really powerful.
It sounds wonderful. And I have a question around, you've been working on this for a while, and you did graduate work at Rhode Island School of Design?
I did. So I've been working on this project for over a year, and I just received my master's at the Rhode Island School of Design in teaching and learning in art and design. And at graduation, I was awarded this grant. And essentially what it was the Graduate Studies Department said, we think this is a really interesting community of people, and we think that you're an artist and you have a very specific sort of idea of how you can celebrate this community. And that's what I really think this public art installation is going to be, is sort of a celebration of everything that we have been and everything that we are and what we're becoming. And so they gave me grant money to pilot this for this fall. And so I've been working very hard this fall on it. But my hope is that the nonprofit will grow and that the projects will continue in the future. And we're already talking to teachers that want to do arts-based language programming, next spring or next fall. So I'm hoping that it continues to grow.
That's great. That's great. And it's also coming at quite an important time where this topic is in the national dialogue, not only in our local dialogue, but also in the national dialogue about immigration and the importance of understanding what happens when you immigrate to this country.
I think I completely agree. And frankly, I was floored when I got the grant for this project because I thought, all of these artists at RISD are going to New York City or going to Berlin to become these big famous artists, and here I am, I just want to do a public art project in Gloucester. But I think that my description of the connection that community members here have to place, and the fact that, Gloucester is America's oldest seaport, and that there's such a wonderful mix of people. It's kind of like we're just sort of a little microcosm of, I think, all the great things that this country sort of represents. And I think that the faculty at RISD recognize that too through the proposal, and that it's a really great time for us to celebrate that. And I think it's great that the mayor has offered the City Hall auditorium for this, and her story was shared with us, which is a very powerful story. And I think that it's going to be really great when it all comes together. Well,
there's such a, that interconnectedness you were talking about, that's so important for us to remember and to recall, and having it come at a celebratory time in our, our lives, which is the holiday season. And it sounds like an immersive experience where you can walk into a civic institution like Gloucester City Hall and see this fantastic light project, and also hear the voices and read stories about our common connection, our common ground.
Yeah, and so I had a teacher at the school recently, at Gloucester High School recently, say to me that she felt that this project would be really important to some of her English language learner students that had just arrived here, because hearing their stories in the context of our local history and everything makes them feel more welcome here. And I think that hopefully a lot of young people are able to come and see the show. I'm hoping to get some field trips out there so that people can really understand that this is something that's important here.
That's great. And you're traveling a bit around to different schools and collecting stories, and right? You spent time at Gloucester High School. And
the Sandy Bay Historical Society in Rockport had some wonderful conversations with ancestral immigration stories, families from Sweden and Finland, and some very moving stories. So I'm hoping to connect stories from across Cape Ann.
That's wonderful. And so to remind our viewers, they can go to the website, and it's, what is it again?
So our website is www.harborvoices.com. And so to be involved in the project, because the more people that are involved, the more beams of light we have, and the stronger this visualization and the installation will be. So you can go to our website, you can submit a story. We have a little form on the website, or you can email us at action@harborvoices.com to share a story. If you'd rather just tell me a story, I'll meet you and you can tell me a story. Or you can go to our website to fund a need for a recent immigrant family in need in the community. And then you can also join us in this celebration of ancestral and recent immigration history at the Middle Street Walk at the City Hall Auditorium right after the Lobster Trap tree lighting on December 9th. We'll be there from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And we'll be there that weekend, and we'd love to have as many people that want to come and celebrate with us.
Well, Stephanie Benson of Harbor Voices Project, thank you so much for being on Cape Ann Report. It's been really exciting to hear about this. Viewers, I hope that you'll go down to City Hall and check it out on December 7th through 9th. Until the next time on Cape Ann Report, take care.